The dust never settled in Cedar Ridge. It hung in the air like a perpetual shroud, coating everything: the weathered storefronts, the hitching posts, the souls of those who called this forgotten corner of the Arizona Territory home. Clara Whitfield stood at the window of the boarding house, watching the afternoon sun paint the distant red rocks in shades of burnt copper and rust. At 19, she had the kind of beauty that the harsh frontier hadn't yet stolen: honey-colored hair that caught the light despite the ever-present dust, eyes the color of sage after rain, and hands that, while roughened by work, still moved with a grace that spoke of better days. Those days were gone now, buried with her parents in the cemetery on the hill. She turned the ring on her finger, her mother's wedding band, a simple gold circle worn thin by years of love and labor. It was all she had left of Elizabeth Whitfield, who had died of fever 2 winters past, and of her father Samuel, who had followed 6 months later. Some said of a broken heart. Clara preferred that story to the truth that drink and despair had claimed him as surely as any bullet. "Clara, these dishes won't wash themselves, Mrs." Hennessy's voice cut through her reverie like a rusty saw through pine. "Coming, ma'am," Clara called back, taking one last look at the street below. A group of cowboys had just ridden in, their horses' hooves stirring up fresh clouds of dust. She didn't recognize them: drifters, most likely, stopping for supplies before heading to wherever men like that headed. The kitchen of Hennessy's boarding house was a furnace in summer and an icebox in winter. Today, in the crushing heat of August, sweat beaded on Clara's forehead before she'd even plunged her hands into the washwater. Mrs. Hennessy, a woman whose girth matched her temper, supervised from her chair near the door where she could catch whatever breeze might dare to venture inside. "That Halbert was asking after you again, Mrs." Hennessy said, fanning herself with yesterday's newspaper. "Says you're behind on your daddy's debts." Clara's hands stilled in the soapy water. Marcus Halbert owned half the businesses in Cedar Ridge and had interests in the other half. He was the kind of man who collected debts like some men collected scalps as trophies of conquest. "Pa's debts died with him," Clara said quietly. "Mrs." Hennessy snorted. "Try telling that to Halbert. Man's got a memory longer than a desert road and twice as unforgiving." The older woman wasn't wrong. In the months since her father's death, Halbert had made his intentions increasingly clear. The debt was just leverage. What he wanted was Clara herself. She'd seen how he looked at her, like a coyote eyeing a trapped rabbit. "How much does he say we owe?" Clara asked, though she dreaded the answer. $200, with interest. The plate Clara was washing slipped from her numb fingers, shattering on the floor. $200 might as well have been 2,000. She knelt to gather the pieces, her mind racing. She made 50 cents a day at the boarding house, plus room and board. Even if she saved every penny. "Careful, girl. That comes out of your wages." "Mrs." Hennessy said, though her voice had softened slightly. She knew as well as Clara what that sum meant. The afternoon wore on in a blur of dishes, sweeping and serving the handful of guests who took their meals at the boarding house. Clara's fingers found the ring repeatedly, turning it around and around as if it might somehow produce an answer to her troubles. As the sun began its descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful if she'd had the heart to appreciate them, Clara made her decision. She couldn't pay the debt, couldn't run. Where would she go, and wouldn't become Halbert's plaything? That left only one option. She waited until Mrs. Hennessy had retired to her room for her evening medicine laudanum for her joints. She claimed, though everyone knew it was for more than that. Then Clara slipped out the back door and made her way down Main Street. The pawn shop sat between the undertaker and the dentist, a placement that seemed fitting somehow. Jacob Morse, the proprietor, was known for his fair dealings, which in Cedar Ridge meant he'd only cheat you half as much as the next man. The bell above the door announced her arrival with a mournful clang. Morse looked up from behind his counter, his sharp eyes taking in her appearance in one quick sweep. "Miss Whitfield," he said, neither friendly nor hostile. "What can I do for you?" Clara's throat felt full of sand. She stepped forward, each footfall seeming to echo in the cluttered shop. Around her, the detritus of other people's misfortunes gathered dust watches, guns, spurs, even a few wedding dresses that made her heart ache for the stories they represented. Her fingers trembled as she worked the ring off. It stuck at her knuckle, as if protesting this final betrayal. When it finally came free, her hand felt naked, weightless. "I need to—" She swallowed hard. "How much for this?" Morse took the ring, examining it with the loop he wore on a chain around his neck. His face remained impassive, but Clara saw the slight tightening around his eyes. He knew what this meant as well as she did. "It's good gold," he said finally. "Old style. I can give you $15. "15," the word came out as barely a whisper. "But it's worth—" "In San Francisco or Denver, maybe 40. But this is Cedar Ridge. Miss Whitfield, 15 is fair." Fair? Nothing about any of this was fair. But Clara nodded. $15 would at least buy her time, maybe enough to figure out something else. She watched as Morse began to write up the ticket. That's when the shop door opened again, bringing with it the scent of leather, tobacco, and trail dust. Clara turned to see one of the cowboys from earlier, tall, lean, with eyes the color of winter sky and a face that looked carved from the same stone as the mountains. He moved with the easy grace of a man comfortable with violence, but not ruled by it. His gaze went from Clara to the ring in Morse's hand, to the tears she didn't realize were streaming down her face. Something shifted in his expression, a tightening of the jaw, a darkening of those pale eyes. "Ma'am," he said, touching the brim of his hat. His voice was low, roughened by dust and distance. Then, to Morse, "You conducting business?" "Just finishing up," Morse replied, but his hand had paused over the receipt. The stranger, Jonas McBride, though Clara didn't know his name yet, stepped closer. He smelled of horse and sweat and something else, something wild like sage after a thunderstorm. "That's a pretty ring," he observed. "Family piece." Clara's voice had deserted her. She could only nod. Shame to let it go. He studied her face with an intensity that should have frightened her but didn't. "What's the debt?" "That's none of your concern," Clara managed, finding her spine. A smile ghosted across his features. "No, ma'am, I suppose it's not." He turned to Morse. "What were you offering?" $15. Jonas made a sound that might have been a laugh. "For a gold ring in times like these." He reached into his vest pocket, pulling out a leather pouch. "I'll give you 30 for it." "It's not for sale to you," Clara said quickly. "I'm pawning it to Mr. Morse." "Were you now?" Jonas's eyes never left hers. "And what happens when you can't pay to get it back, when Morse here sells it to someone passing through, and it's gone forever?" The truth of his words hit her like a physical blow. She hadn't thought that far ahead, hadn't let herself— "I'll get it back," she whispered. "Will you?" He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the scar that cut through his left eyebrow. "Or will Halbert make sure you never have the chance?" Clara's intake of breath was sharp. "How do you—" "This is a small town. Miss Whitfield. Word travels." He held out his hand to Morse. "The ring." Morse, looking between them like a man watching a rattlesnake and a hawk circle each other, slowly placed the ring in Jonas's palm. What happened next would be burned into Cedar Ridge legend, told and retold in saloons and parlors for years to come. Jonas McBride took Clara Whitfield's face gently between his calloused hands, bent his head, and kissed her with a tenderness that seemed impossible from a man who wore his guns like other men wore their watch chains. It wasn't a long kiss, but it was thorough. And when he pulled back, Clara's knees felt like water and her heart hammered against her ribs like a wild bird. "Sir," was all she could manage. her face burning hotter than the forge at the blacksmith's. Jonas smiled then, a real smile that transformed his weathered features. He took her left hand, slipped the ring back onto her finger where it belonged, and closed her fingers around it. "It stays with you," he said simply. Then he placed the leather pouch on Morse's counter. "For your trouble." He touched his hat brim again and walked out, leaving Clara standing there with her mouth open, her lips still tingling, and her mind reeling. Morse cleared his throat. "Well," he said after a long moment, "that's not something you see every day." Clara fled then, out into the cooling evening air, the ring burning on her finger like a brand. She ran back to the boarding house, up the stairs to her small room under the eaves, and collapsed on her narrow bed. Who was that man? Why had he done that? The kiss, the money, the ring. None of it made sense. Cowboys didn't go around kissing respectable women in pawn shops. They didn't pay off strangers' debts. They didn't. She touched her lips, still feeling the pressure of his, the surprising softness, the way he'd held her face like she was something precious. Outside her window, the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky. Somewhere in town, a piano played a melancholy tune. Dogs barked. Life in Cedar Ridge went on as it always had. But for Clara Whitfield, holding her mother's ring and trying to quiet her racing heart, nothing would ever be the same. The morning after the incident at Morse's pawn shop, Clara woke with the taste of scandal on her lips. She'd barely slept, her mind replaying that impossible moment over and over, the stranger's hands gentle on her face, the shocking warmth of his mouth on hers, the weight of the ring sliding back onto her finger. She dressed quickly in her worn calico dress, pinning her hair with trembling fingers. The mirror showed her flushed cheeks and bright eyes, and she turned away, disturbed by her own reflection. Downstairs, the boarding house dining room buzzed with conversation that died the moment she entered. 6 pairs of eyes turned to her, the regular boarders, forks suspended halfway to their mouths. Mrs. Hennessy stood by the coffee pot, her expression unreadable. "Well," said Tom Garrett, the bank clerk who occupied the room next to Clara's, "if it isn't Cedar Ridge's most famous young lady." Clara's stomach dropped. "I don't know what you mean." "Oh, come now," chimed in Walter Price, the traveling salesman who'd been staying at the boarding house for 2 weeks. "The whole town's talking about what happened at Morse's yesterday, that cowboy who—" "That's enough, Mr. Price." "Mrs. Hennessy cut in sharply. "Miss Whitfield has work to do." But the damage was done. As Clara mechanically served breakfast, she caught whispered fragments, "Kissed her right there in the shop." "Paid Morse $30? Never seen anything like it." By the time she escaped to the kitchen, her hands were shaking so badly she nearly dropped the coffee pot. Mrs. Hennessy followed, closing the door behind her. "Sit," the older woman commanded, pouring 2 cups of coffee. "Now, you want to tell me what really happened?" Clara sank into a chair, wrapping her hands around the hot cup. "I don't know. I went to pawn Mother's ring, and this stranger, he just—" She touched her lips unconsciously. "He bought it and gave it back to me." "After kissing you?" "After kissing me," Clara confirmed miserably. "Mrs. Hennessy, I didn't ask for it. I didn't even know his name until this morning when Mr. Price said, 'Jonas McBride.'" Mrs. Hennessy's expression was thoughtful. "He took a room here last night, the one at the end of the hall." Clara's cup rattled against its saucer. "He's staying here. Paid a week in advance. Cash." The older woman studied Clara over her spectacles. "Seems he's planning to stick around a bit." Before Clara could respond, the kitchen door burst open. Tom Garrett stuck his head in, eyes wide with excitement. "Halbert's here," he announced. "And he looks mad enough to chew nails." Clara's blood turned to ice. She heard the heavy footsteps in the dining room, the scrape of chairs as boarders scrambled to get out of the way. Then Marcus Halbert filled the kitchen doorway. his face the color of raw beef. At 45, Halbert was what passed for prosperous in Cedar Ridge. His suit was store-bought, his boots polished, his hair pomaded into submission. But underneath the veneer of civilization, he was still the same man who'd built his fortune through intimidation and questionable dealings. "Miss Whitfield," he said, his voice dangerously soft. "I heard an interesting story this morning." Clara stood, forcing herself to meet his eyes. "Mr. Halbert, seems you found yourself a benefactor yesterday, some drifter who takes liberties with young ladies in public places." I didn't, Clara stammered. "Didn't what?" Halbert stepped closer, and Clara could smell his pomade, sickly sweet and cloying. "Didn't let him paw you in front of Jacob Morse, didn't take his money like a common—" "That's enough." The voice came from the doorway behind Halbert. Jonas McBride stood there, freshly shaved but still wearing his trail clothes, his gun belt sitting easy on his hips. His pale eyes were fixed on Halbert with the kind of focus that made smart men nervous. Halbert turned slowly. "And here's the man himself. McBride, isn't it?" "It is." "You're new to Cedar Ridge, so perhaps you don't understand how things work here." Halbert's smile was all teeth. "Miss Whitfield and her family owe me a considerable sum. That makes her welfare my business." "Does it now?" Jonas moved into the kitchen with that same easy grace Clara had noticed yesterday. "Way I see it, a lady's welfare is her own business." "She's no lady," Halbert spat. "Not after yesterday's display." The temperature in the kitchen seemed to drop 10 degrees. Jonas's hand didn't move toward his gun, but suddenly everyone was very aware of it. "You want to reconsider those words?" Jonas said quietly. Halbert's face flushed darker. "You threatening me, cowboy?" "Just offering friendly advice." Jonas's smile was thin as winter ice. "Man should be careful how he talks about a lady, especially in front of witnesses." The two men stared at each other for a long moment. Then Halbert turned back to Clara. "This isn't over," he said. "Your daddy's debt comes due end of the month. $200. You can pay it, or—" His eyes traveled over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "We can work out other arrangements." He shouldered past Jonas and stormed out. The boarding house held its breath until the front door slammed. Mrs. Hennessy was the first to speak. "Well, that was exciting." Jonas's eyes found Clara's. "You all right?" "Miss Whitfield?" She nodded, not trusting her voice. He studied her for another moment, then touched his hat brim and left. Clara sank back into her chair. "What have I done?" "Nothing, Mrs. Hennessy said firmly. "That man did you a kindness, however unconventional. Halbert's the one making trouble." But Clara knew better. In a town like Cedar Ridge, reputation was everything, and hers had just been shattered. The rest of the morning passed in a blur. Clara went through her chores mechanically, aware of the whispers that followed her, the speculative looks. When she served lunch, Jonas's chair remained empty, though his presence seemed to linger in the room like smoke. It was mid-afternoon when she finally encountered him again. She was hanging laundry behind the boarding house, fighting the desert wind that tried to tear the sheets from her hands, when she heard boots on gravel. "Need help?" Jonas stood a respectful distance away, hat in hand, in daylight. She could see him more clearly, the sun-weathered skin, the premature silver threading through his dark hair, the way he held himself like a man ready for trouble but not looking for it. "I can manage," she said, wrestling with a pillowcase. He nodded, but didn't leave. Instead, he pulled out a tobacco pouch and began rolling a cigarette with practiced ease. "About yesterday," Clara began, then stopped. What could she say? "Thank you for humiliating me. Thank you for ruining what was left of my reputation." "I owe you an apology," Jonas said, surprising her. She turned to face him fully. "You owe me an explanation." A rueful smile touched his lips. "Fair enough. He lit the cigarette, took a long draw. You ever see a wild horse caught in barbed wire? The question seemed so random that Clara just stared. They fight, he continued. Fight until they tear themselves bloody. Sometimes they get free, sometimes they don't. His eyes found hers. Yesterday, in that shop, you looked like you were caught in wire, about to tear yourself bloody trying to get free. So you decided to kiss me? The words came out sharper than she intended. I decided to buy you time, he corrected. The kiss, he shrugged. Call it payment, or call it impulse. Man sees something beautiful about to be destroyed. Sometimes he acts without thinking. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. I'm not beautiful. Now that's where you're wrong, Miss Whitfield. His gaze was steady, serious, but that's not why I did it. Then why? He was quiet for a long moment, smoking, watching the sheets snap in the wind. My sister had eyes like yours, he said finally. Same color, same. He gestured vaguely. Same look. When she was backed into a corner, she married a man to pay off family debts. He killed her within a year. The words hung between them like a physical thing. Clara's hand stilled on the clothesline. I'm sorry, she whispered. It was a long time ago. Jonas dropped the cigarette, grinding it under his heel. But when I saw you yesterday, saw what you were about to do, saw Morse ready to take advantage. He shook his head. I couldn't just watch. So you kissed me and ruined my reputation instead. Your reputation was already forfeit the moment you walked into that pawn shop, he said bluntly. In towns like this, a woman pawning her mother's wedding ring, people draw their own conclusions. At least now they're talking about a mystery instead of desperation. Clara wanted to argue, but she knew he was right. The gossip would have been just as bad either way. Perhaps worse if she'd actually gone through with pawning the ring. What happens at the end of the month? Jonas asked. When Halbert comes collecting, I don't know. The admission cost her. I can't pay. I won't do what he wants. So I suppose I'll run. Where? Anywhere. California, Oregon. It doesn't matter. Jonas picked up his hat, turning it in his hands. There might be another way. Clara waited, hardly daring to breathe. I'm not a rich man, he said, but I've got some money saved. Enough to cover the debt, start fresh somewhere else. I can't take your money, Clara said automatically. Not talking about charity. He met her eyes. I'm talking about a business arrangement. Marriage. The word hit her like cold water. Marriage. Think about it, Jonas said calmly. Married woman's debts become her husband's responsibility. Halbert can't touch you. We head west, find a place to settle. Year or two down the road, if you want to go your own way. No hard feeling. You're insane, Clara breathed. You don't even know me. I know enough. He settled his hat back on his head. I know you'd rather lose everything than compromise yourself. I know you're strong enough to work in this heat without complaining. I know you loved your mother enough to nearly destroy yourself keeping her ring. He paused. And I know you kiss like a woman who's got fire banked inside, waiting for the right reason to let it burn. Clara's face flamed. Mr. McBride. Think about it, he said again, touching his hat brim. Offer stands until Halbert comes calling. He walked away, leaving Clara standing among the billowing sheets, her mind reeling. Marriage to a stranger who'd kissed her in a pawn shop and spoke of her like she was something worth saving. She pressed her fingers to her lips, remembering. Then she looked down at her mother's ring, gold catching the afternoon sun. It stays with you, he'd said. But at what cost? The week following Jonas's proposal passed in a strange dream. Clara went about her duties at the boarding house, served meals, washed dishes, and pretended not to notice the way conversation stopped when she entered a room. Jonas kept his distance, taking his meals at odd hours, always polite but never pressing. It was Friday evening when she finally sought him out. She found him on the back porch of the boarding house, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of copper and gold. He didn't turn when she approached, but she saw the slight tension in his shoulders ease. Mr. McBride, she said formally. Miss Whitfield? He shifted to make room on the bench. Pretty evening. She sat, careful to maintain proper distance. I need to know more about you, if I'm to even consider... She trailed off, unable to say the word. Marriage, he supplied calmly. Fair enough. What would you like to know? Everything. Where you're from, why you're here, why you'd offer to marry a stranger. Jonas pulled out his tobacco pouch, taking his time rolling a cigarette. Born in Missouri, farm country, had 3 sisters and 2 brothers, though only my brother Samuel's still living. Fought in the war union side, came west after. He lit the cigarette, exhaled slowly. Been drifting ever since. That's facts, not reasons, Clara observed. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Smart woman. He was quiet for a moment. I told you about my sister Rose. What I didn't say was that I could have stopped it. Had money saved from a cattle drive, enough to pay the debt. But I was young, proud, thought she should stand up to the family, not give in. His voice roughened. She was dead before I made it home. Clara's throat tightened. That wasn't your fault? Wasn't it? He flicked ash from the cigarette. I've been carrying that weight for 12 years. When I saw you in that shop, he shrugged. Maybe I saw a chance to balance the scales a bit? So I'm your penance? No. His eyes found hers, intense in the fading light. You're a woman in trouble who deserves better than what this town's offering. The rest is just me trying to make sense of it. They sat in silence as the sun slipped behind the mountains. Finally, Clara spoke. Tell me about the marriage, the real terms. Jonas stubbed out his cigarette. Simple enough. We get married, legal and proper. I pay Halbert. We leave town, head to Colorado or Wyoming. I've got my eye on some land near Denver Goodgrass, water rights. We build a life, or at least the appearance of one. And between us, he turned to face her fully. That's up to you. I'm offering protection, not making demands. You want a marriage in name only. That's what you'll get. You want more. He let the sentence hang. Why would you agree to that most men would expect? I'm not most men. His voice was flat. And you're not merchandise. Clara studied his profile in the gathering darkness. There was something broken in Jonas McBride, something that resonated with her own grief. 2 damaged souls trying to find their way. Was that foundation enough for a marriage? I need time to think, she said. Time's running short. Halbert won't wait past month's end. I know. She stood, smoothing her skirts. I'll have an answer soon. That night, sleep eluded her again. She lay in her narrow bed, turning the possibilities over in her mind. Marriage to Jonas meant safety from Halbert. But at what cost? Trading one unknown for another seemed foolish. Yet something about the quiet cowboy called to her perhaps that very brokenness she'd sensed. Saturday brought unwelcome clarity. Clara was scrubbing the boarding house floors when she heard commotion from the street. She went to the window to see Jonas facing down 3 men she recognized as Halbert's hired hands rough types who did the rancher's dirty work. Need to learn some manners. One of them was saying, Mr. Halbert doesn't appreciate strangers interfering in his business. Jonas stood relaxed, hands loose at his sides. That's so. It is. Maybe you need a lesson in Cedar Ridge hospitality. Clara's heart pounded as the 3 men spread out, surrounding Jonas. But he didn't seem concerned, just watchful, like a cat among dogs. The first man lunged, throwing a haymaker that would have felled most men. Jonas simply wasn't there. He'd moved with liquid grace, letting the punch sail past. His own response was economical, a short, sharp blow that dropped his attacker like a sack of grain. The other two came at once. Jonas ducked, weaved, struck with precision. It was like watching a dance. If dances ended with men groaning in the dirt, within 30 seconds, all three were down. Jonas straightened his vest, picked up his hat from where it had fallen. "Tell Halbert that Miss Whitfield is under my protection now. He's got a problem with that. He can take it up with me directly." He walked away without looking back, leaving the three men to pick themselves up and slink off. Clara realized she'd been holding her breath. "Well, Mrs." Hennessy said from behind her. "That was educational." Clara jumped. "How long have you been standing there?" "Long enough." The older woman's expression was thoughtful. "That man's got skills you don't learn farming in Missouri." That evening, Clara found Jonas at the stable, tending to his horse, a beautiful bay gelding with intelligent eyes. He looked up as she approached, but continued brushing the animal's coat. "Saw what happened earlier," she said without preamble. "Figured you might. Where did you learn to fight like that?" His hand paused in its rhythm. "Here and there, man travels alone. He'd better know how to handle himself." "That wasn't barroom brawling. That was—" She searched for words. "Professional." Jonas set down the brush, gave the horse a final pat. "After the war, I hired on with some people, learned things, used those skills to make money." He turned to face her. "Nothing I'm proud of, but nothing that should worry you either. Were you an outlaw?" "No, least not the way you mean." He leaned against the stall. "I tracked men for bounties, brought them in alive when I could. When I couldn't," he shrugged. "A bounty hunter." Clara absorbed this information, added it to the picture she was building of Jonas McBride. "Is that why you have blood money?" His jaw tightened. "Some of it. The rest from cattle drives. Poker. Honest work when I could find it. That bother you?" She considered. "I don't know. Should it?" "That's for you to decide." He picked up his saddle, began checking the leather. "But understand something, I never hunted anyone who didn't have it coming. Never took a bounty on anyone innocent." "How can you be sure?" "Because I checked. Every time. Lost money more than once walking away from a bounty that didn't sit right." He met her eyes. "I have done plenty I regret, Miss Whitfield, but I sleep at night." Clara believed him. There was truth in his voice, in the direct way he met her gaze. "Why did you stop?" "Got tired of looking at the world over a gun sight. Wanted to build something instead of always tearing down." He adjusted a stirrup. "That's why the land in Colorado. Chance to start clean." "With a wife you don't love?" "Love's a luxury neither of us can afford right now," Jonas said quietly. "But respect partnership, those we can build on." Clara wrapped her arms around herself. The stable was cooling as night fell, and she shivered. Without a word, Jonas shrugged out of his coat and draped it over her shoulders. It smelled of leather and tobacco and something uniquely him. "I'm scared," she admitted in a small voice. "Of me?" "Of everything. Of staying here and becoming Halbert's property. Of leaving with you and finding something worse. Of being trapped in a loveless marriage like—" She stopped. "Like your parents?" She looked at him sharply. "My parents loved each other." "I know. Saw it in how you hold that ring." His voice gentled. "But you saw what that love cost them too. Your PA couldn't bear losing her. Could he—" Tears stung Clara's eyes. "No! Maybe loveless isn't the worst thing. Maybe careful is better. Maybe two people who choose partnership clear-eyed have a better chance than those blinded by passion." "Is that what you're offering, partnership?" "I'm offering escape," Jonas said simply. "The rest, we figure out as we go." Clara fingered the ring through her dress. Her mother had married for love and died young, worn out by frontier life. Her father had loved so deeply he'd drowned in grief. Maybe Jonas was right. Maybe careful was better. "3 conditions," she heard herself say. He waited. "When I keep my mother's ring, always." Wouldn't have it otherwise. 2, if I decide to leave after a year, you let me go. No arguments, no claims. Agreed. 3. She took a deep breath. You teach me to shoot, to defend myself. I won't be helpless again. Something flickered in his eyes' surprise. Maybe approval. I can do that. Then I accept your proposal, Mr. McBride. He straightened slowly. You're sure? No, but I'm more sure of you than I am of Halbert. She pulled his coat closer around her. When? Tomorrow, if you're willing. Sunday seems fitting. The preacher won't... She stopped. Of course. Money talked, even to men of God. I'll handle the arrangements. Jonas said, you just be ready. Clara nodded and turned to go, then stopped. That kiss, in the pawn shop. Was that calculated too? In the lamplight, she saw him smile, a real smile that transformed his weathered features. No, ma'am, that was pure impulse. Been kicking myself for it ever since. Good, she said, surprising them both, and fled before he could respond. Back in her room, Clara sat on her bed and twisted her mother's ring. Tomorrow she would marry a stranger, a bounty hunter with gentle hands and dangerous skills, a man who offered partnership instead of passion. Outside her window, a coyote howled in the distance. The sound was lonely, defiant, wild. It seemed fitting somehow, a benediction for the choice she'd made. She thought of Jonas's words, 2 people who choose partnership clear-eyed. Tomorrow, she would walk into a new life with eyes wide open. Tonight, she allowed herself to wonder what might grow from such careful ground if trust could bloom where love feared to tread, if partnership could become something more. The ring caught the lamplight as she turned it one last time. I'm keeping it, Mama, she whispered. Just like he said, it stays with me. Sunday dawned clear and merciless, the sky a hard blue dome over Cedar Ridge. Clara stood before her mirror in her best dress, a faded blue cotton that had been her mother's trying to steady her shaking hands. In 2 hours, she would marry Jonas McBride. Mrs. Hennessy appeared in the doorway with a small bouquet of desert wildflowers. Thought you might want these. Every bride should have flowers. I'm not really a bride, Clara said softly. This is a business arrangement. The older woman snorted. Tell that to your face, girl. You're glowing like a penny lamp. Before Clara could respond, a commotion erupted from downstairs, raised voices, the crash of furniture. She and Mrs. Hennessy rushed to the landing to see Jonas facing Marcus Halbert in the entrance hall. Half the town seemed to have crowded in behind them. You think you can steal what's mine? Halbert's face was purple with rage. Miss Whitfield isn't property. Jonas replied calmly, and in an hour, she'll be my wife. The hell she will. Halbert's hand moved toward the gun at his hip. Jonas's voice turned to iron. You really want to do this here now? The boarding house held its breath. Then Halbert seemed to deflate slightly, his hand dropping. This isn't over, McBride. That little piece of paper won't protect either of you. Maybe not, Jonas agreed. But it's a start. Halbert's eyes found Clara on the stairs, and the venom in them made her step back. You've made your choice, girl. Don't come crying to me when this saddle tramp leaves you broken and used up. That's enough, Jonas said quietly, but there was danger in his voice now. You've said your piece. Time to go. For a moment, violence hung in the air like smoke. Then Halbert turned on his heel and stormed out, his men trailing behind. The crowd began to disperse, buzzing with excitement. Jonas looked up at Clara, and something in his expression made her heart skip. You all right? She nodded, not trusting her voice. Good. I'll see you at the church. The ceremony itself was a blur. The preacher, Reverend Mills, performed the service with obvious reluctance, speaking the words as quickly as propriety allowed. The witnesses were Mrs. Hennessy and, surprisingly, Jacob Morse from the pawn shop, who'd shown up in his best suit looking sheepish. When it came time for the rings, Jonas produced a simple gold band. "It was my mother's," he said quietly, sliding it onto Clara's finger alongside her own mother's ring. Seemed fitting. Clara had no ring for him, but he didn't seem to expect one. When Reverend Mills pronounced them man and wife, Jonas leaned in and brushed his lips against hers. Nothing like that first kiss in the pawn shop. Just a gentle seal on their bargain. Outside the church, a small crowd had gathered. Some faces were curious, others hostile. Clara saw several of the town's respectable women whispering behind their fans. She lifted her chin and took Jonas's offered arm. "Well, Mrs. McBride," he said, ready to face the wolves. "Mrs. McBride?" The name felt foreign on her tongue. "As ready as I'll ever be." They'd barely made it halfway across the dusty street when trouble found them. 3 women Clara recognized as the wives of Halbert's business associates blocked their path. "Clara Whitfield," said Dorothy Hutchins, the banker's wife. Or should I say McBride now, though I wonder how long that name will last. "Ladies," Jonas said politely, touching his hat brim. Dorothy ignored him, focusing on Clara. "We just want you to know that decent society won't forget what kind of woman you are, kissing strange men for money, selling yourself to the highest bidder." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I've done nothing improper." "Haven't you?" This from Martha Grant, whose husband ran the general store. Everyone knows what happened in Morse's shop. And now this rushed marriage, we all know what that usually means. The implication hung in the air like a slap. Clara opened her mouth to defend herself, but Jonas spoke first. "Ma'am," he said to Martha, his voice dangerously pleasant. "I believe you have several credit accounts at your husband's store that are considerably overdue. Perhaps you should focus on your own house before throwing stones at others." Martha's face went white, then red. "How dare you?" "And you, Mrs. Hutchins," Jonas continued, turning to Dorothy. "Didn't your husband foreclose on the widow Martinez last month, put her and her 4 children out in the street? Seems to me that's a bit more scandalous than 2 people choosing to marry." Dorothy sputtered, but Jonas wasn't finished. He looked at the 3rd woman, Ellen Price. "I won't even start on what your husband gets up to on his business trips to Tucson." The 3 women retreated in disarray, leaving Clara staring at her new husband. "How did you know all that?" A slight smile touched his lips. "I may be new to Cedar Ridge, but I keep my ears open. Amazing what people say around strangers in saloons." They continued to the boarding house, where Mrs. Hennessy had prepared a small wedding breakfast. It was awkward, just the 3 of them around the dining table, but the older woman did her best to keep conversation flowing. "Where will you go?" she asked, pouring coffee. "Denver, eventually," Jonas replied. "But we'll take our time. No sense rushing into winter weather." Clara picked at her food, the reality of what she'd done settling over her like a heavy blanket. She was married, to a man she'd known less than 2 weeks. The ring on her finger, his mother's ring, felt strange and heavy. After breakfast, Jonas excused himself to settle accounts and prepare for departure. Clara went to pack her few belongings, folding her meager wardrobe into a carpet bag that had been her mother's. When she came to her father's letters, tied with a faded ribbon, her hands stilled. "Knock, knock, Mrs. Hennessy said from the doorway. "Thought you might need this." She held out a winter cloak, thick wool lined with flannel. "Gets cold in Colorado." "I can't accept this," Clara protested. "Nonsense. Call it a wedding gift." The older woman's eyes were suspiciously bright. "You're a good girl. Clara, that man of yours, he's got shadows, but I think he'll do right by you." Clara hugged her impulsively. "Thank you for everything." "Go on now, before I start blubbering like an old fool." Jonas was waiting with 2 horses his bay and a gentle-looking mare. Figured you'd want your own mount, he said, helping her up. Her name's Buttercup. Previous owner's choice, not mine. Despite everything, Clara found herself smiling. She's perfect. They were just mounting up when Halbert appeared at the end of the street with a dozen armed men. Clara's blood turned to ice. Going somewhere, McBride, Halbert called out. Jonas shifted slightly in his saddle, his coat pulling back to reveal his gun. Just exercising our right to travel freely, unless Cedar Ridge has become a prison camp since breakfast. You owe me $200. Her father owed you that? He's dead. Debt died with him, legally speaking. The law's got nothing to do with it. Halbert snarled. It's about what's right. What's right? Jonas laughed, a sound without humor. What's right is you've been bleeding this town dry for years, charging interest that would make a bank robber blush. What's right is folks being able to live without fear of losing everything to your greed. Halbert's hand twitched toward his gun. Big talk for a man outnumbered 12-1. 13-2, said a voice from behind them. Jacob Morse stepped out of his shop, an old shotgun in his hands. The lady's under McBride's protection now. Halbert, that means something in this town. 14-2, called Tom Garrett from the boarding house porch, a rifle across his knees. Never did like bullies. One by one, others appeared: the blacksmith, the livery owner, even Reverend Mills holding what looked suspiciously like a pistol under his Bible. Not everyone, not even most of the town. But enough. Enough to make Halbert's men nervous. This isn't over, Halbert said finally, his voice thick with rage. No, Jonas agreed. But it is for today. He touched his hat brim mockingly. Give my regards to your wife. Tell her I hope she enjoys the new dress she ordered from San Francisco, the one that cost more than most folks here see in a year. Halbert's face went from red to white. Without another word, he wheeled his horse around and rode off, his men following. Jonas turned to the small crowd that had supported them. Much obliged, folks. Morse spat tobacco juice. Never did like that kiss business in my shop. But a man who stands up to Halbert, that's different. You take care of that girl. I intend to. As they rode out of Cedar Ridge, Clara looked back one last time. The shabby little town looked even smaller from a distance, gradually swallowed by the vastness of the desert. Everything she'd ever known was behind her now. Regrets? Jonas asked, following her gaze. No, she said, and was surprised to find she meant it. Just, it's strange. Leaving gets easier, he said, the leaving, though I hope this is the last time for both of us. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the horses picking their way along the dusty trail. The sun climbed higher, turning the desert into a shimmering furnace. Jonas called a halt at a cluster of rocks that offered some shade. We'll rest here during the worst of the heat, he said, helping her down. Travel in the evening when it's cooler. He was efficient in making camp, even this temporary one, checking for snakes, spreading a blanket in the shade, making sure the horses had water. Clara watched him work, this stranger who was now her husband. Why did you really do it? She asked suddenly. Tell me the truth. Jonas paused in unsaddling his horse. Which part? All of it. The kiss, the offer, standing up to Halbert. You could have written on, found easier places, easier women. He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then he came and sat beside her on the blanket, careful to maintain proper distance. You ever see lightning hit the desert? He asked. How it lights everything up for just a second. Shows you the world different than you thought it was. Clara nodded. That's what happened in Morse's shop. I saw you standing there, proud even in defeat, choosing to sell the one thing that mattered to keep your freedom. And I thought. He stopped, ran a hand through his hair. I thought maybe I'd been looking at the world wrong. Maybe there were still things worth fighting for, people worth saving. I didn't need saving, Clara said softly. No, he agreed. You'd have managed, survived, but surviving isn't living. I know I've been doing it for 12 years. He looked at her then, those winter sky eyes intense. Maybe I didn't save you. Clara, maybe you saved me, gave me a reason to stop drifting. The words hung between them in the desert heat. Clara felt something shift in her chest, a loosening of the tight knot she'd carried since her father's death. I don't love you, she said, needing to be clear. I don't love you either. Jonas replied easily. But I respect you, and that's not nothing. No? Clara agreed, fingering the 2 rings on her finger, her mother's and his. It's not nothing. As the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, they mounted up again. The trail stretched ahead, winding through canyons and across plains toward an uncertain future. But for the first time in months, Clara felt something that might have been hope. She was Clara McBride now, wife to a complicated man with gentle hands and dangerous skills. It wasn't the life she'd imagined, but it was hers. And that, she thought as they rode into the painted sunset, was a beginning. The storm hit 3 days out of Cedar Ridge, rolling across the desert like God's own fury. Clara had seen storms before, but nothing like this. The sky turned black as pitch in the middle of the afternoon, lightning cracking across the heavens like the world was splitting apart. We need shelter, Jonas shouted over the rising wind, his coat whipping around him. There's a box canyon about a mile north. We can wait it out there. But a mile was too far. The storm struck with full force while they were still in the open, rain coming down in sheets so thick Clara could barely see Jonas riding beside her. Then came the riders, 6 men emerging from the storm like demons, bandanas over their faces. Albert's men, Jonas said grimly, pulling his rifle from its scabbard. Stay close. The first shot cracked through the rain, splintering rock near Clara's head. Buttercup reared in terror, and it took all Clara's strength to keep her seat. Ride, Jonas commanded, returning fire. Make for those rocks. They spurred their horses through the deluge, bullets whining past like angry hornets. Clara bent low over Buttercup's neck, her heart hammering against her ribs. Behind them, she could hear pursuit hoofbeats thunder loud even over the storm. Jonas twisted in his saddle, firing with deadly accuracy. One pursuer fell, then another, but more kept coming. They were almost to the rocks when Buttercup stumbled, throwing Clara hard to the muddy ground. She hit with a force that drove all breath from her body, stars exploding across her vision. Through the rain and pain, she saw Jonas wheel his horse around, placing himself between her and their attackers. Get up! He shouted. Clara, get up! She struggled to her feet, gasping, as Jonas continued to fire. His rifle clicked empty. He threw it aside, drawing his pistol in one fluid motion. More men fell, but they kept coming, and Jonas was just one man. A rope sailed out of the rain, catching Jonas around the shoulders and yanking him from his horse. He hit the ground hard, rolling, coming up with his gun still in hand. But they were on him 4 men, maybe 5, overwhelming him with numbers. No! Clara screamed, stumbling toward them. One of the attackers backhanded her, sending her sprawling again. Through blurred vision, she saw them beating Jonas, boots and fists raining down. He fought like a wildcat, but there were too many. Albert wants the woman alive, one of them panted. Kill him and be done with it! Terror gave Clara strength. She crawled through the mud, fingers closing on Jonas's dropped pistol. It was heavier than she expected, slick with rain. She'd never fired a gun before, but she raised it with shaking hands. The shot was impossibly loud, even in the storm. The man standing over Jonas staggered back, clutching his shoulder. The others turned, saw her with the gun. Drop it, girl, one commanded. You don't know what you're doing. Get away from him, Clara said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. The gun wavered in her grip, but her finger found the trigger again. I'll shoot. I swear I will. They might have rushed her, but Jonas chose that moment to surge up from the ground. even beaten, even bloodied. He was dangerous. His fist connected with one man's jaw with a crack audible over the thunder. Another he caught with an elbow to the throat. Clara fired again. Wild but effective, the men scattered, suddenly unsure. Jonas snatched up a fallen rifle, and together they backed toward the rocks, covering each other. "Can you ride?" Jonas asked. Blood ran from a cut above his eye, and he held his left arm awkwardly. "Yes," Clara lied. Everything hurt, but stopping meant death. They caught their horses, mounted with difficulty. The remaining attackers had regrouped but seemed reluctant to pursue perhaps the storm. Perhaps the fight had gone out of them. Jonas led them into the maze of rocks, finding a shallow cave barely large enough for them and the horses. They tumbled from their saddles, Jonas immediately moving to block the entrance despite his injuries. "Let me see," Clara said, reaching for him. "I'm fine." "You're not." She pushed his hand aside, gasping at the blood soaking his shirt. "You're shot." "Grazed," he corrected, though his face was pale. "Had worse." Clara had nothing to tend him with. Their supplies were soaked, scattered. She tore strips from her petticoat, packed the wound as best she could. Jonas sat still under her ministrations, watching her face. "You saved my life," he said quietly. "You saved mine first." Her hands were shaking now, reaction setting in. "I've never shot anyone before." "You did good, real good." He caught her hands, stilling them. "But you're hurt too. Let me look." She hadn't realized until he said it, but her shoulder blazed with pain where she'd hit the ground. Jonas's hands were gentle as he examined it, checking for breaks. "Bruised, not broken," he concluded. "You'll be sore for days." They huddled in the cave as the storm raged outside. Clara had never been this close to him before, close enough to see the fine lines around his eyes, the way his wet hair curled slightly at his collar. Despite everything, she felt safe. "They'll come back," she said. "Maybe, but not in this storm. Halbert's reach is long, but his men aren't stupid. They'll wait for clear weather." "Then what do we do?" Jonas was quiet for a moment. "We survive tonight, rest. In the morning, we run hard for Fort Buchanan. It's federal territory. Halbert can't touch us there." "How far?" 2 days, maybe 3. He shifted, winced. "I can make it." But Clara could see the truth. He was hurt worse than he admitted. The wound might be a graze, but he'd taken a beating, and riding hard would be agony. "Tell me about Colorado," she said, trying to distract them both. "The land you want." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Green valley, mountains all around, stream running through it, cold and clear, good soil, protected from the worst weather. Place a man could build something lasting. And a woman. His eyes found hers in the dim light. Woman could make it a home, if she wanted. The word hung between them, home. Clara hadn't had one since her parents died. The boarding house had been survival. Nothing more, but the picture Jonas painted. "I want to learn everything," she said suddenly. "Shooting, riding, all of it. I won't be helpless again." "You weren't helpless today." "I was lucky. Next time I want to be skilled." Jonas nodded slowly. "All right, when we're safe, I'll teach you everything I know." The storm began to ease as darkness fell. They shared what food they had, hardtack and jerky, washed down with rainwater caught in their hats. It should have been miserable, but Clara found a strange peace in the simple meal, the quiet company. "Your shoulder," Jonas said, "it needs tending." Clara hesitated, then turned her back to him, loosening her dress enough to expose the injury. His fingers were careful, spreading some kind of salve he produced from his saddlebags. The touch was clinical, impersonal, but Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks nonetheless. "There," he said, his voice slightly rough. "That should help." She fixed her dress, turned to face him. In the confined space of the cave, they were very close. She could see droplets of rain still clinging to his eyelashes, the steady rise and fall of his chest. "Jonas," she began, not sure what she wanted to say. He raised a hand, silencing her, his head tilted, listening. Then she herded 2 horses, moving carefully through the rocks. In one smooth motion, Jonas drew his gun, pushed Clara deeper into the cave. She gripped the pistol he'd given her, heart racing. "McBride," the voice echoed off the canyon walls. "We know you're in there. Come out, and we'll make it quick. Make us dig you out, and the woman suffers for it." Jonas's jaw tightened. He looked at Clara, and she saw him weighing options, finding them all bad. "I'll go," he said quietly. "While they're focused on me, you run. Take my horse, he's faster. Ride for Fort Buchanan. Don't stop for anything." "No," the word came out fierce. "We're partners. Remember, partners don't abandon each other." "Clara?" "No." She raised the pistol. "We fight together or not at all." Something shifted in his expression, surprise, maybe respect. Then, incredibly, he smiled. "All right, Mrs. McBride, together." They moved to the cave mouth, weapons ready. The rain had stopped, leaving the rocks gleaming in the moonlight. Clara counted 5 men, maybe 6, spread out in a semicircle. 30 seconds, McBride," the voice called again. Jonas looked at Clara. "You remember what I taught you about shooting?" She nodded, though he'd taught her nothing yet. "Aim, center mass, squeeze, don't jerk, breathe." His free hand found hers briefly. "And Clara, whatever happens—" "I know," she said. "The ring stays with me." He blinked, then huffed a quiet laugh. "That's not what I was going to say." "Oh." "I was going to say whatever happens. You've already saved me. From the moment you said yes in that stable." Before Clara could respond, before she could process the warmth flooding through her at his words, Jonas was moving. He burst from the cave like an avenging angel, gun blazing. Clara followed, her world narrowing to the pistol in her hands, the targets before her. The night exploded in gunfire and chaos. Men shouted, horses screamed. Clara fired again and again, not sure if she hit anything but making them duck, buying Jonas time. Then, suddenly, it was over. The remaining attackers fled into the night, leaving their dead behind. Jonas stood in the moonlight, chest heaving, alive. "Clara," he turned, searching for her. "Here," she managed, legs suddenly weak. He crossed to her in 2 strides, pulled her against him. She could feel his heart racing, matching her own. For a moment they just stood there, holding each other, alive against all odds. "We need to move," Jonas said finally, though he didn't let go. "They'll be back with more men." Clara nodded against his chest, but she didn't move either, not yet. In this moment, in his arms, she felt something she hadn't expected, not just safe, but home. When they finally mounted up and rode out into the desert night, Clara carried that feeling with her. They were battered, hunted, far from safe, but they were together. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The fort was still 2 days away. 2 days of running, hiding, surviving. But as Clara followed Jonas through the moonlit landscape, she found herself thinking not of the danger behind, but the promise ahead: green valleys, clear streams, and a place to build something lasting. With a man who'd started as a stranger but was becoming so much more. The abandoned line shack appeared just as Jonas had said it would, a rough wooden structure half hidden in a grove of cottonwoods. 2 days' hard ride from where they'd fought off Halbert's men. They'd pushed the horses to their limits, stopping only when absolutely necessary, both of them swaying in their saddles from exhaustion. "We'll rest here tonight," Jonas said, though the sun was barely past noon. His voice was hoarse, strained. Horses needed. Clara knew it wasn't just the horses. Jonas's face was gray beneath his tan, and he'd been listing to one side for the past hour. The wound he'd dismissed as a graze was worse than he'd let on. The shack was musty but solid, with a stone fireplace and a narrow cot covered in dusty blankets. Jonas immediately set about checking the perimeter, though Clara could see the effort cost him. "Sit," she commanded, surprising them both with her firm tone. "You're about to fall over." "I'm fine." "You're not?" She guided him to the cot, began unbuttoning his shirt despite his protests. "I may be new to this life, but I'm not blind. You've been bleeding through your bandages for miles." When she peeled back the cloth, she had to bite back a gasp. The wound was angry, inflamed, not just a graze, a deep furrow that needed proper tending. "There's whiskey in my saddlebags," Jonas said quietly, "and a needle and thread." Clara had helped her mother tend injuries before, but never like this. Never alone with so much depending on her steadiness. She retrieved the supplies, built up the fire, heated water. Her hands shook as she threaded the needle. "I trust you," Jonas said simply. Those 3 words gave her strength. She cleaned the wound with whiskey, watched him grit his teeth against the pain, then, stitch by careful stitch, she closed the gash. Jonas never made a sound, though sweat beaded on his forehead. "There," she said finally, tying off the last stitch. "It's not pretty, but it should hold." Jonas caught her hand as she turned away. "Clara, thank you." She looked down at their joined hands, his calloused and scarred, hers smaller but no longer soft. When had that happened? When had she stopped being the sheltered girl from Cedar Ridge? "You should rest," she said. But Jonas didn't release her hand. Instead, he tugged gently, bringing her down to sit beside him on the narrow cot. "We need to talk about what happens if—" "Don't!" The word came out sharp. "You're not dying. Jonas McBride. I won't allow it." A smile ghosted across his lips. "Yes, ma'am. But still, you need to know there's money in my saddlebags. Papers for the land in Colorado. If something happens, it's all yours." "Nothing's going to happen." "Clara." His free hand came up to cup her cheek. "Listen to me, please." She stilled, caught by the intensity in his eyes. "I've done a lot of things in my life," he continued. "Some good, some bad. But marrying you, that might be the one pure good thing. Want you to know that." Tears stung her eyes. "Jonas." "Shh, let me finish." His thumb brushed away a tear that had escaped. "These past days, seeing your strength, your courage, I know we said this was business, partnership, but somewhere along the trail, things changed. For me, at least." Clara's heart was racing. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that when we get to Colorado, I don't want separate rooms, don't want careful distance." His voice roughened. "I'm saying I want to build something real with you, Clara, if you'll have me." The shack was silent except for the pop of the fire. Outside, wind stirred the cottonwoods. Clara looked at this man, her husband in name only, who'd become so much more. She thought of all the careful walls she'd built, all the promises to keep her heart safe. Then she thought of Jonas stepping between her and danger, again and again, of his gentle hands tending her bruises, of the way he looked at her not like property or conquest, but like a partner, like she was precious. "Yes," she whispered. Jonas blinked. "Yes. Yes, I'll have you. Real marriage, real partnership, real—" She stopped, not quite ready for that last word. "Real everything." Jonas finished for her. Then he was kissing her. And this time there was nothing of business in it. This was pure feeling gratitude and desire, and something deeper, something that might grow into love given time and tending. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Clara felt heat in her cheeks. "You need rest," she said, trying for stern but achieving only breathless. "Stay with me," Jonas asked. "Just stay close, please." She couldn't refuse, not with that vulnerability in his voice. She lay down beside him on the narrow cot, careful of his injury. Jonas pulled a blanket over them both, his good arm coming around her. "Tell me about your family," Clara said softly. "Your sisters." Jonas was quiet for so long she thought he'd fallen asleep. Then, Rose was the oldest, mothered us all after Ma died, had hands that could gentle any horse, coax life from the stubbornest soil. She used to sing while she worked hymns, mostly, but sometimes these old mountain songs that made you ache for places you'd never been. Clara closed her eyes, listening to the rumble of his voice against her ear. Sarah came next, quiet little thing, but sharp as a blade, taught herself to read from Pa's old books, then taught the rest of us. She wanted to be a teacher. His arm tightened around Clara. Fever took her when she was 12, same winter as Ma. And the youngest, Maggie. She could hear the smile in his voice. Wild as a Mustang. That one. Couldn't keep her in skirts, always stealing my trousers, running off to fish or hunt or climb trees. Pa gave up trying to make a lady of her. What happened to her? Married a good man, moved to California, got 3 kids now, all hellions like their ma. She writes sometimes. He paused. I should write back more. You will, Clara said, when we're settled. When we're settled. Jonas agreed, and the words were like a promise. They dozed fitfully through the afternoon. Clara starting awake at every sound, but the shack remained their secret. Halbert's men either lost or regrouping. As evening fell, she rose to tend the horses and prepare a simple meal. Jonas tried to help, but she could see the pain each movement caused. Let me, she said. You've taken care of me since we left Cedar Ridge. My turn now. She found dried beans and salt pork in the shack's meager supplies, managed to make something resembling food. They ate by the fire, shoulders touching, the domesticity of it making her heart ache in unfamiliar ways. I was wrong, Jonas said suddenly. About what? That first day, in the pawn shop, I said you weren't beautiful. He turned to look at her, firelight dancing in his eyes. I was wrong. You're the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks. The firelight's addling your brain. No. He caught her hand, brought it to his lips. Your beauty's not the obvious kind. It's in your spine when you face down men twice your size, in your hands when you tend wounds, in your eyes when you look at that ring and think of your ma. Jonas. I know we're not there yet, he continued. No, you can't say the words. But I need you to know I'm falling. Clara, falling hard and fast and glad of it. Clara's throat felt tight. She thought of her parents. How they'd loved so fierce it destroyed her father when he lost her mother. She'd sworn never to risk that kind of pain. But looking at Jonas now, seeing her own feelings reflected in his eyes, she wondered if perhaps the greater risk was in not loving at all. I'm scared, she admitted. Of me. Of losing you, of ending up like Pa, broken and bitter. Jonas pulled her close, mindful of his injury. Can't promise we'll have forever, he said against her hair. But I can promise this whatever time we get. I'll make it worth the risk, every day. Clara, I'll make it worth it. She lifted her face to his. And this kiss was different again, slower, deeper, a seal on promises made in firelight. When they finally parted, Clara felt something settle in her chest, some last resistance crumbling. They prepared for sleep, Jonas insisting Clara take the cot while he made a pallet by the fire, but she wouldn't hear of it. You're injured, she said firmly, and we're married. Properly married now? By your own words. In the end, they shared the narrow space. Clara careful of his wound as she curled against his good side. It should have been awkward, uncomfortable. Instead, it felt like coming home. Clara. Jonas's voice was drowsy in the darkness. That ring of yours, still staying with you. She smiled against his shoulder. Always, but now it's got company. She touched the simple band he'd given her. His mother's ring. 2 rings, 2 promises, past and future. And present. Presents right here, she said. In a line shack in the middle of nowhere, with a shot-up bounty hunter who talks too pretty. Jonas's chest rumbled with quiet laughter. Could be worse. Could be better, too. Could be Colorado. Soon, he promised. Few more days to Fort Buchanan, then north to Denver. Find our valley. Build our home. Our valley, our home. The words should have terrified her. Instead, they sang in her blood like a promise of spring. Outside, coyotes called to each other across the desert. The fire burned low, casting dancing shadows. In Jonas's arms, Clara felt the last of her walls crumble. She wasn't falling like her father had, desperate and destructive. She was choosing, eyes open, heart steady despite its racing. "Jonas!" she whispered. But he was asleep, his breathing deep and even. She pressed a kiss to his shoulder, then settled against him. Tomorrow would bring new dangers, new challenges. Halbert wouldn't give up easily. The trail to Colorado was long and uncertain. But tonight, in this moment, they were safe, they were together, and maybe, just maybe, they were falling in love. The ring on her finger caught the last of the firelight, gold warming against gold. Her mother's ring and Jonas's, past and future, circled together. Clara smiled and closed her eyes, letting sleep take her. In her dreams, she saw green valleys and clear streams, a house with smoke rising from the chimney, and Jonas standing in the doorway, whole and well and hers. It was a good dream, one worth fighting for, one worth the risk. When she woke, it would be to danger and flight and uncertainty, but also to Jonas's arms around her, to partnership becoming something more, to love growing like wildflowers in the desert, unexpected, resilient, and absolutely beautiful. Fort Buchanan rose from the desert like a promise of civilization, its adobe walls glowing amber in the morning sun. Clara had never been so glad to see the flag snapping in the wind above the gate. They'd ridden through the night, Jonas growing stronger despite his wound, both of them eager to reach federal protection. But as they approached the fort's entrance, Clara spotted a familiar figure waiting by the gates. Marcus Halbert sat his horse like a king surveying his domain, flanked by a dozen armed men. Worse, beside him stood a man in a federal marshal's uniform. "Jonas," Clara breathed. "I see them," he replied, his voice calm, but she felt the tension in his body where her hand rested on his back. "Stay close. Let me do the talking." They rode forward steadily, Jonas's hand casual near his gun. The morning traffic of soldiers and civilians parted around them, sensing trouble. "McBride," Halbert called out as they drew near. "Marshal Donnelly here has some questions for you." The marshal was a hard-faced man with calculating eyes. He stepped forward, one hand resting on his pistol. "Jonas McBride, I'm placing you under arrest for the murder of William Tate in Tucson, 3 years past." Clara's blood turned to ice. "That's a lie." "Ma'am, I'll need you to step aside," Donnelly said coldly. "The hell I will." Clara moved Buttercup closer to Jonas's bay. "My husband's no murderer." Halbert's smile was triumphant. "Seems the good marshal received some interesting information by telegraph last night about a certain bounty hunter who killed a man in cold blood. Shot him in the back, they say." Jonas hadn't moved, hadn't spoken, but Clara could feel the coiled readiness in him, like a spring wound too tight. "That's not how it happened," Jonas said finally, his voice level. "Tate drew first. There were witnesses." "Dead witnesses," Donnelly corrected. "Conveniently dead in a saloon fire 2 weeks after the shooting. Very tidy." Clara's mind raced. This was Halbert's doing. She could see it in his satisfied expression. He'd found leverage, a way to separate them. "Hey, you can't do this," she said desperately. "We're on federal land. You need proof, a warrant." Got both, Donnelly interrupted, producing a folded paper. Judge Harriman in Tucson issued it yesterday. Mr. Halbert here was kind enough to bring it to my attention. For a price, no doubt, Jonas observed dryly. Halbert's face darkened. Watch your tongue, murderer. You'll hang for Tate, and your widow will need protection. I'm a charitable man. I'll make sure she's taken care of. The implications in his voice made Clara's skin crawl. She saw Jonas's jaw tighten. His hand inched toward his gun. Don't, she whispered urgently. That's what he wants. A crowd was gathering soldiers, civilians, curious faces pressing close. Among them, Clara spotted something that gave her hope, a young lieutenant she recognized from her father's funeral. Thomas Garrett, Tom's cousin, who'd been stationed at the fort. Lieutenant Garrett, she called out. Please, you know me. You knew my father. This is a setup. Ma'am, I can't interfere with federal business, Garrett said uncomfortably. But his eyes were troubled as they took in the scene. Smart boy, Halbert approved. Now then, McBride, you coming peaceful? Or does this get ugly? Jonas looked at Clara, and she saw resignation in his eyes. He was going to surrender, to prevent bloodshed, to protect her. No, she said fiercely. Jonas, no! It's all right, he said softly. Remember what I told you, the papers, the money. I said no. Clara's voice rang out across the courtyard. She turned to address the growing crowd. My name is Clara McBride, daughter of Samuel Whitfield. You all know what Marcus Halbert is, a loan shark, a bully who's bled Cedar Ridge dry for years. He's doing this because I wouldn't become his mistress, because my husband protected me. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Halbert's face flushed. Shut your mouth, woman! I will not. Clara stood in her stirrups, fueled by desperation and rage. Jonas McBride is a good man. He saved me from this vulture, and now Halbert's using a 3-year-old shooting a fair fight. I'd wager to steal back what he couldn't take by force. That's enough. Marshal Donnelly moved toward them. McBride, dismount, now! But before Jonas could comply, Lieutenant Garrett stepped forward. Marshal, a word. Not now, soldier. Sir, with respect, I think you should hear this. Garrett's voice was firm. I was in Tucson 3 years ago. My unit was passing through. I remember the Tate shooting. The crowd fell silent. Donnelly frowned. And William Tate was wanted for murder himself. Killed a family outside Phoenix, man. Woman, 2 kids. McBride brought him in alive, but Tate broke free at the jail. Came at McBride with a knife in Paulson's saloon. Garrett looked directly at Jonas. It was self-defense. I saw it myself. Clara's heart leaped, but Donnelly shook his head. That's not what the warrant says. Then the warrant's wrong, Garrett insisted. Or bought and paid for, sir. You're about to arrest an innocent man on the word of Marcus Halbert, the same Halbert who's under investigation for land fraud in 3 counties. This was news to Clara, and apparently to Halbert, whose face went from red to white. That slander. Is it? Garrett produced a telegram from his pocket. Came this morning from the territorial governor's office. They're very interested in your land deals. Mr. Halbert. Seems several families lost their homesteads to forged documents. The crowd was buzzing now, the tide of opinion shifting. Donnelly looked uncertain, caught between the warrant in his hand and the lieutenant's testimony. Jonas spoke into the moment of indecision. Marshal, I'll make you a deal. Hold me here at the fort for 24 hours. Telegraph Tucson. Talk to Sheriff Patterson. He was there that night. He'll confirm what the lieutenant's saying. Or you could just take your blood money and arrest him now, Halbert snarled. It was a mistake. Donnelly's eyes narrowed. You suggesting I've been bribed, Mr. Halbert? I know. I just meant because that would be a federal crime. Donnelly's voice had gone dangerously quiet. Lieutenant, place Mr. Halbert under arrest. We'll sort this out proper." "You can't do this," Halbert exploded. "I own half of Cedar Ridge. I have influence." "Not here, you don't." Donnelly cut him off. He turned to Jonas. 24 hours. McBride. You'll be held as a guest of the fort, not a prisoner. If Sheriff Patterson confirms your story, you're free to go. If not," he shrugged. "Fair enough." Jonas agreed. "And my wife stays with me," he added, reaching for Clara's hand. Donnelly nodded. "The fort's hospitality extends to Mrs. McBride as well." As Halbert was led away, still protesting, he locked eyes with Clara. The venom there made her shiver. "This isn't over," he mouthed. But for now, they were safe, together, with time to prove Jonas's innocence. Clara squeezed his hand, felt him squeeze back. They were given quarters in the officers' section, a small but clean room with a real bed and a window overlooking the parade ground. As soon as the door closed behind them, Clara threw herself into Jonas's arms. "I thought I'd lost you," she said against his chest. "Take more than Marcus Halbert to separate us now," Jonas replied, holding her tight. Then, pulling back to look at her, "That was some speech you gave out there. Reminded me of a preacher calling down fire and brimstone." Clara blushed. "I was angry." "You were magnificent." He cupped her face in his hands. "My warrior wife." The word wife sent warmth through her. Not just in name anymore, but in truth. She lifted her face for his kiss, pouring all her relief and love into the contact. When they parted, both breathing hard, Jonas rested his forehead against hers. "We should rest. Tomorrow will bring what it brings." But Clara had other ideas. The confrontation had left her shaken, needing to affirm life, connection, the bond between them. "Jonas," she said softly, "I don't want to waste any more time being careful." His eyes darkened as he understood her meaning. "Clara, are you sure?" For answer, she began unbuttoning his shirt, careful of his healing wound. "I've never been more sure of anything." What followed was gentle and passionate by turns, two souls finding each other fully for the first time. Jonas was patient, tender, letting Clara set the pace. And when they lay entwined afterward, the afternoon sun painting gold stripes across the bed, Clara knew she'd crossed a threshold from which there was no return. "I love you," she whispered against his shoulder, the words coming easier than she'd expected. Jonas's arms tightened around her. "And I love you, Clara McBride, have since the moment you stood up to me in that stable, all fire and pride." They dozed through the heat of the day, waking to share quiet words and gentle touches. For these stolen hours, the outside world ceased to exist. There was only them, only this room, only love growing stronger with each passing moment. As evening fell, Lieutenant Garrett knocked on their door with news. "Telegraph came through from Sheriff Patterson," he said, grinning. "Confirms everything I said and more. Tate was a killer. McBride did the territory a service. You're free to go come morning." "And Halbert?" Jonas asked. Garrett's grin widened. "Under federal investigation. Turns out those land fraud allegations have teeth. He'll be tied up in court for years, if he doesn't end up in prison." After Garrett left, Clara and Jonas celebrated quietly, planning their future over the simple meal brought to their room. Colorado still called. The Green Valley Jonas had described, the life they would build together. "We'll leave at first light," Jonas decided. "Put distance between us and whatever's left of Halbert's reach." "Together," Clara agreed, touching the 2 rings on her finger. That night, they made love again. Slower this time, savoring each touch and sigh. When Clara lay in Jonas's arms afterward, she thought of how far she'd come from the desperate girl in the pawn shop. That girl had been ready to sell her most precious possession just to survive another day. Now she had something more precious than any ring: a partner, a protector, a lover, a future. She had Jonas, who'd bought her mother's ring with a kiss and given her so much more. "What are you thinking?" Jonas asked, feeling her wakefulness. "About circles," Clara said. "How that ring went from my mother to almost being sold, to being saved, to here, and how we've come full circle too, from strangers to married strangers too." "To us," Jonas finished. "No more strangers, just us." "Just us," Clara agreed, and settled against him to sleep. Tomorrow would bring the trail to Colorado. New challenges, the work of building a life together. There would be hard days ahead. She knew the frontier didn't offer easy lives, but they would face them together. 2 rings on her finger, love in their hearts, and the promise of home gleaming like gold in their shared dreams. The circle was complete, but their story was just beginning. The Colorado Valley was everything Jonas had promised and more. They crested the ridge on a crisp September morning, 6 weeks after leaving Fort Buchanan, and Clara's breath caught in her throat. Below them spread a sea of golden grass bordered by aspens already turning amber, a crystal stream winding through like a silver ribbon. Mountains rose on 3 sides, protective walls of granite and pine. "Home," Jonas said simply, but his voice carried a wealth of emotion. Clara reached over to squeeze his hand. "Home," she agreed. They'd purchased the land in Denver with the money Jonas had saved, 160 acres of prime grazing land with water rights, bought fair and square. The previous owner, an elderly man named Josiah Hartley, had been eager to sell and move to town near his daughter. "Built a cabin here in 69 inches, Hartley had told them, sketching a rough map. "Nothing fancy, but she's solid, root cellar, good well, even a small barn. Been empty 2 years now, but the bones are good." The cabin, when they found it, was indeed solid logs weathered silver gray but tightly chinked, a stone chimney still standing proud. It needed work, new shingles, the porch rebuilt, windows reglazed, but Clara saw potential in every weathered board. "We'll make it beautiful," she said, dismounting to walk through the knee-high grass. "We'll make it ours," Jonas corrected, following her. The first weeks were a whirlwind of hard work. Jonas, despite his healing wound, threw himself into repairs with a single-minded determination. Clara learned quickly. Wielding hammer and saw alongside him, her hands grew calloused, her arms strong, but she'd never felt more alive. Neighbors appeared as if from nowhere, the frontier telegraph that spread news of new arrivals. The Andersons from the neighboring ranch brought fresh bread and salt for luck. Old Pete Kowalski, who ran sheep in the high country, helped Jonas repair the barn roof. Mary Patterson, the nearest woman neighbor 5 miles away, became Clara's fast friend and teacher in the ways of frontier housekeeping. "You'll want to lay in supplies before the snow flies," Mary advised, helping Clara plan a kitchen garden for spring. "Winter here's no joke, beautiful but fierce." Clara took the warning seriously, and she and Jonas worked dawn to dusk, preparing. They patched every crack in the cabin, stocked the root cellar, cut and split enough wood to see them through till spring. Jonas taught her to shoot properly, as promised, setting up targets behind the barn. "Squeeze, don't jerk," he instructed, his hands steady on her shoulders. "Let the shot surprise you." The rifle cracked, and the tin can flew off the fence post. Clara whooped in triumph, and Jonas laughed, catching her in a spinning hug. "That's my girl, Annie Oakley, better watch her back." These were the golden days, working side by side, building something together. Evenings found them exhausted but content, sharing simple meals by the fire, planning improvements, dreaming of the future. "Next spring, we'll get cattle," Jonas said one night, sketching plans. "Start small, maybe 20 head, build the herd slow and steady." "And chickens," Clara added. "Maybe a milk cow. Oh, and I want to plant apple trees by the house." Jonas smiled at her enthusiasm. "Whatever you want. We've got time." Time. Such a precious word. They'd been married barely 3 months. But Clara couldn't imagine life without Jonas now. He'd kept every promise, teaching her to ride better, shoot straight, read the weather and the land. In return, she'd made the cabin a home, bringing warmth and life to what had been merely shelter. The first snow came early, October barely half gone. Clara woke to a world transformed, everything blanketed in pristine white. She pressed her nose to the window like a child, marveling at the beauty. "First high country snow?" Jonas asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "It's magical," she breathed. "Wait till you see it in deep winter. Sometimes the drifts reach the roof." But Clara wasn't afraid. The cabin was snug, the woodpile high, the root cellar full, and she had Jonas. Together, they could weather anything. November brought a surprise visitor. Jonas had ridden to the Anderson ranch to help with the difficult calving, leaving Clara alone for the first time. She was working on a quilt Mary Patterson had taught her the basics when hoofbeats in the yard made her look up. Through the window, she saw a lone rider, hunched against the wind. Her hand went automatically to the rifle by the door, Jonas's training taking hold. But as the rider drew closer, she gasped in recognition. Marcus Halbert looked like a shadow of his former self. His fine clothes were trail-worn, his face gaunt, his usual arrogance replaced by something desperate. Clara kept the rifle trained on him as she opened the door. "Hey, Mrs. McBride," he said, and even his voice was diminished. "I need to talk to you. My husband isn't here." "I know. I waited till he left." Halbert's laugh was bitter. "Don't worry. I'm not here for trouble. I'm finished with that. Finished with everything." Against her better judgment, Clara found herself curious. "What do you want?" "To make amends, if such a thing is possible." He reached slowly into his coat, and Clara tensed, but he only pulled out an envelope. "The investigation ruined me. Lost everything, the businesses, the land, the respect I thought I'd bought. This is all I have left." He held out the envelope. "It's the deed to your father's house in Cedar Ridge. I bought it from the bank after everything. Thought I'd use it as leverage someday." His smile was rueful. "But there's no point now. It should be yours." Clara lowered the rifle slightly. "Why?" "Because I need to balance the scales somehow. Because your father was a good man who deserved better. Because you—" He stopped, shook his head. "You were right about me. I was a vulture, feeding on others' misfortune. Prison's waiting for me back in Arizona. 3 to 5 years. My lawyer says. Maybe when I get out, I'll be a different man." He set the envelope on the porch rail. "Be happy, Mrs. McBride. You won that right." He turned to go, then paused. "Your husband, McBride, he's a good man, better than I ever was. Take care of each other." Then he was gone, riding away into the gathering storm. Clara stood in the doorway for a long moment, envelope in hand, trying to reconcile this broken man with the tyrant who'd made her life miserable. When Jonas returned that evening, she showed him the deed. He studied it carefully, then looked at her. "What do you want to do with it?" Clara thought of Cedar Ridge, of her parents' graves on the hill, of Mrs. Hennessy in the boarding house. Then she looked around the cabin at the quilt in progress, the bread rising by the stove, Jonas's coat on the peg by the door. "Sell it," she decided. "Use the money for cattle come spring. That life's behind me now." Jonas pulled her into his arms. "You sure?" "I'm sure this is home, your home." That night, as snow fell softly outside, they made love with a tenderness born of gratitude for second chances, for roads not taken, for the life they were building together. Winter settled over the valley like a benediction. The days fell into a rhythm: morning chores, afternoons spent on indoor projects, evenings by the fire. Clara learned to knit from a book Mary had lent her. Jonas carved and whittled, his clever hands creating useful things from wood. They talked endlessly about everything and nothing. Jonas told stories of his travels, the places he'd seen. Clara shared memories of her parents, the happy times before hardship took hold. They planned for spring, for summer, for years ahead. "Want to hear something strange?" Clara said one night in December, looking up from her knitting. "Always." "I'm grateful to Halbert." Jonas raised an eyebrow. "That is strange." "No? Think about it. If he hadn't been so awful, I never would have gone to that pawn shop. You never would have kissed me. We never would have found each other." Jonas considered this. "Still want to punch him in the face." Clara laughed. "Fair enough, but I'm glad how it all turned out. Even the running for our lives part. Even that, it showed me who you really are, who we are together." Jonas set aside his whittling, pulled her onto his lap. "And who are we together?" Clara pretended to think. "Well, you're a reformed bounty hunter turned rancher who kisses women in pawn shops." "Woman, singular. Only ever you." "And I'm a boarding house girl turned frontier wife who shoots tin cans and makes terrible biscuits." "Hey, the last batch was almost edible." She swatted him playfully. "Together, we're Clara and Jonas McBride, builders of homes, planters of dreams, survivors of Marcus Halbert and desert storms." "Together, we're everything," Jonas said seriously, and kissed her until she forgot about knitting entirely. January brought the deepest cold, but the cabin stayed warm. They celebrated their first Christmas together with a small tree Jonas cut from the forest, decorated with strings of berries and Clara's attempts at paper angels. Their gifts were simple. Clara knitted Jonas a scarf. He carved her a jewelry box for her rings. "For when you're not wearing them," he explained. "I'm always wearing them," she protested. "I know, but just in case." She kissed him for the thought, for the careful craftsmanship, for being Jonas. February arrived with a blizzard that trapped them inside for 3 days. Clara thought she might go stir-crazy, but instead found peace in the enforced closeness. They played cards, told stories, made love in the afternoon while snow piled against the windows. "I could do this forever," she said, drowsy in his arms as wind howled outside. "Careful what you wish for," Jonas teased. Winter's got at least another month in her. But finally, inevitably, spring came creeping back to the valley. The snow melted in rushing torrents, revealing green grass beneath. Clara's garden plot emerged from the white, ready for planting. Birds returned, filling the air with song. On the first truly warm day in April, Jonas found Clara standing by the stream, face turned to the sun. "Penny for your thoughts." She smiled without opening her eyes. "Just thinking how different this spring is from a year ago. I was alone, desperate, about to lose everything. Now. She turned to him, and he caught his breath at the joy in her face. "Now I have everything. Home, love, hope, you." "Clara," his voice was rough with emotion. "And maybe something more." She continued, taking his hand and placing it on her still flat stomach. "Come autumn, we might need to add a room to the cabin." Jonas stared at her, then at his hand on her belly, understanding dawning. "You mean—" "I mean—" She laughed at his expression, joy bubbling up like spring water. "You're going to be a father, Jonas McBride." He swept her up, spinning her around, both of them laughing and crying at once. When he set her down, he kissed her deeply, thoroughly, then dropped to his knees to kiss her stomach too. "Hello in there," he said softly. "I'm your papa, and I promise you, little one, you'll never doubt you're loved. Never wonder if you belong. This is your home, your family, your place in the world." Clara ran her fingers through his hair, tears streaming down her face. "I love you?" "And I love you." He stood, cupped her face in his hands. "Both of you. All of us. This family we're making." They walked back to the cabin hand in hand, already making plans. The extra room, a cradle Jonas would build. Names to consider. The future stretched before them, bright with promise. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson, Clara fingered the rings on her hand, her mother's and Jonas's mother's. 2 circles of gold binding past to present to future. "It stayed with me," she said softly. Jonas looked at her questioningly. "The ring. You said it stays with me. That day in the pawn shop, you were right. It stayed and brought me so much more." Jonas lifted her hand, kissed the rings. "Just the beginning, Clara, just the beginning." And it was. In years to come, the cabin would echo with children's laughter. The ranch would prosper. They would face hardships, drought, harsh winters, the usual trials of frontier life, but they would face them together. The girl who'd almost bartered her mother's ring had found something more precious than gold. She'd found home, family, a love worth every trial they'd faced to claim it. As stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Clara leaned against Jonas and smiled. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges and joys, but tonight, in this perfect moment, she had everything she'd never dared dream of. The ring had stayed with her, just as Jonas promised. And so had he. And that, Clara thought as Jonas's arm came around her, as new life quickened within her, as their valley settled into peaceful evening that was worth more than all the gold in Colorado. Their story, which began with a desperate girl and a mysterious cowboy in a dusty pawn shop, had become something larger, a testament to the power of love, courage, and keeping faith when all seemed lost. The circle was complete. The future beckoned. And Clara McBride, ring on her finger and joy in her heart, was ready for all of it. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. I hope Clara and Jonas's journey touched your heart as much as it did mine. Where are you listening from? Please share in the comments below. I'd love to know where in the world this story has traveled. If you enjoyed this tale of love conquering all in the American frontier, please subscribe to Wild West Night for more stories. Give this video a like, and don't forget to hit that hype button to help more people discover these tales of romance and adventure in the Old West. Until next time, partners.